We are part of the environment. What happens to the environment happens to us. Lawns are really a model of an industrial society applied to nature. We need to have a nature society applied to nature and to ourselves. And so whatever steps you can take to do that are well worth taking.
Welcome to the Planetary Health Lab podcast, where science meets whole person healing. We interview top experts in integrative wellness to bring you vetted, evidence-based tools for mental and physical well-being. Because when we align human health with planetary health, we all thrive.
Can you give us a little bit about your background and what it is that you specialize in?
Well, I'm an environmental psychologist. I was a college professor for 50 years, now retired, but I still am writing and doing consulting. I have written a number of books, many articles and chapters. My main focus of my work has been on what happens to people that live in contaminated environments. That's the focus of my consulting and as well. But I've written a lot about that. And the main book I've written is a book called Contaminated Communities, although I've written other ones. I also have worked on climate change issues. As a professor, I was a professor of environmental studies and sustainability. Sustainability is one of my major interests. Been very much focused on gardening and growing an orchard and basically converting my own property away from lawns toward habitat. I've also headed a nonprofit organization that began in 1982, and I'm now president emeritus of that, but I was president for 40 some years. And that's called Orange Environment. And we do lots of things as an environmental organization in Orange County, New York, and the region to promote sustainability of our communities and the integrity of our ecology. And that involves all kinds of activism and the kinds of proactive activities and reactive activities that environmental groups do. But we also have had a longstanding permaculture program. And in the past couple of years, we've developed a project on getting people to plant pollinators on their property. And we've been growing milkweed in greenhouses and giving it away and selling other pollinator plants, and basically trying to do everything we can to encourage people to become small-scale gardeners, converting their lawns into habitat for pollinators and all life. So, including with people's lives themselves, since they're much enriched by that.
I want to dive into more about your own garden, but first I'd like to know, can you break down what an environmental psychologist is, or kind of what that field of study is, just in just basic layman's terms for those who might not know?
Sure. Most of us are aware that in 1970, you had Earth Day. It was also the passage of the National Environmental Policy Act and the beginning of environmental regulation in the United States and copied around the world. And new fields were created in many disciplines to address this new focus on environment. Environmental psychology was one of those, and I began right at the beginning of the field in 1970, 71. And I began teaching environmental psychology by the end of 1971. So it became my specialty. My PhD is actually in social psychology. Layman's terms, we all live in the environment, but in the modern world, we don't know how to relate to it. In fact, many of us don't even pay attention to the fact that we live in the environment. We don't think about the impact that we have on the environment. We don't think about the impact that the environment has on us. At least we don't think about that until there's some real reason to think about it. And whether that's wildfire smoke that many people are now being bathed with a good bit of the year, or whether it's discovering that your water's contaminated, or some kind of bad news. Some people find the environment in positive ways, but oftentimes we find it in negative ways because we're not paying attention to it. And the bottom line is that if you were going to ask one basic question about what is the core fallacy of modern life, it's this failure to actually understand that we are part of the environment, and that what happens to the environment happens to us. And so a lot of my work has been focused on trying to establish that.
Yeah, I can see that day to day. There definitely seems to be a disconnect from our more natural selves. It's hard. I feel like a lot of it comes to sort of unwiring or rewiring back to that baseline. That can be so beneficial for sure. Well, that seems like a perfect segue then. So can you tell us more about what you're doing in your backyard and what you're trying to encourage people to do, like you said, to spread more of this knowledge. Yeah, just give us a little bit more detail about what projects you got going on.
Well, I've lived in a bunch of places, and I've always planted lots of trees, and actually bushes. I'm a very focused person. I love to forage for my food, and so I've always tried to convert the places I live to places that had lots of berries and lots of fruit. A lot of my focus everywhere I've gone is to leave lots of trees planted, and I've planted many hundreds of trees in my life. It's a wonderful thing to do if you haven't done it. And so I've had a kind of a tree orientation. I've also gardened for 50 years. I had the pleasure of co-teaching with an amazing gardener and energy expert and named Bill McCuskey, and we worked together for probably 40 years. And I basically learned my real gardening skills from him, although I gardened before that. And he follows a mode of gardening that was introduced in the United States by a company called Rodale, which has been very influential in the evolution of organic gardening, using raised beds, trying to disturb the soil in the least way possible, trying to do everything you can to enrich the soil through compost and in your practices, trying to use water in a very responsible and effective way, and then just growing lots of stuff. Where I live now, I live in a village. I bought the property next to me. It was completely lawn, as was my property when I moved in, and I set about immediately destroying that lawn in every way that I could. So that's a mixed bag in the sense that some lawn is a nice thing, but at the same time, lawn is the least productive thing that you can do that's a plant on your property. And the ecological value of a lawn is not extreme. It does have some value in terms of holding the ground together and stopping erosion, but you really don't have much ecological value from that lawn. And when you mow it, you're using power usually, although I do have a hand mower, but I switched to an electric mower, but you're using power. And if you're using a gas mower, then you're causing a lot of pollution and using fossil fuels, causing greenhouse gases. I mean, you can just go on and on and on with the destruction of mowing. And it takes a lot of time, or you're paying a lot of money for someone to do it for you. So lawn care or landscaping is a paradigm that I quickly came to realize was a mixed bag and maybe heavily negative bag. And in my own teaching with many, many tens of thousands of students over 50 years, I ripped up lawns verbally, and on my property, I ripped up lawns literally. And instead, I planted plants. I planted fruit trees. Although native plantings are really the best thing to do, and I am a strong supporter of native plantings, I themed my property with food-producing plants, and some of which are not native. And I wanted to test and see how well they worked. That experiment has been great in many cases. There are a few cases where even buying from reputable sources, I introduced plants that are invasive. And I've spent a lot of my time trying to erase those plants from my property. So you live and learn. Hopefully people learn from others and don't plant things that are invasive. But I didn't have that information when I planted them, although they were great food producers, but they're just invasive. But I've converted a property that was all lawn to a property that is what I call an urban forest. It has along my sidewalks an edible pathway so that people walking on the sidewalk can nibble. And I try and keep anything that's dangerous out of that pathway in terms of things you can eat. Most people are afraid to eat things that they see because they don't know what they are. But if they aren't, they can really snack out walking along my property. And, if I took you out on my pathway right now, there's edible fruit growing right now. And that will occur all across the year. I'm, try to harvest as much food as I can on my property, and we try to eat it. Yesterday we had this delicious jam that was made out of mulberries that I picked because mulberries are in season. And the berries that are out on the sidewalk are gummy berries, which are a delicious red berry. They have a seed in them. It makes it a little bit more difficult to make jams and stuff out of them, a little more complicated, but they're great snacking fruit. And hopefully I can snack my way and eat my way through an entire year here until it gets too cold. And what happens is that's really an ideal situation. I don't own much land, but my land is capable of producing a substantial amount of input into our diet. I'm not sure that I can grow enough food to completely sustain my family off of the property, but I probably could if I really tried. But it's amazing how much you can grow in a small amount of land. I grow some things in raised beds, other on stands, on wooden stands. And that's because I have introducing habitat. I have a healthy rabbit population. I have an amazing squirrel population, which sometimes eats all of my fruit. I didn't bring them in, they were here already. And we've had a lot of problems with deer, although deer are now diseased in this area. So I haven't had as much problem with deer eating things. And a lot of the focus has been trying to restore the soil on the property because the property I bought has terrible soil. It was along an old railroad bed. So there was a lot of ash in the soil. It was probably a wetland at some point because there's an enormous amount of clay. So it's not necessarily, to begin with, the happiest place, but by composting everything that I can, I've been able to restore as much of the property, the soil as I can. But that's a major goal that I have is soil restoration. So I have almost no lawn left. Some of it has been taken over by various invasives. Some of them are good invasives and some less happy. At one point, I accidentally introduced a weed called gout weed onto my property by bringing in horse manure. And I learned the hard way that horses, unlike cows, don't metabolize the things they eat completely, and they can pass seeds from things they've eaten along. And so I introduced an invasive through bringing in manure. Cow manure is great, though. I love cow manure. But at this point, I just use my own compost. So, soil restoration, growing these plants, I spend a lot of my time pruning. I have in the past not grown flower gardens, but because we were doing all these pollinator projects, I got rid of the last piece of lawn that I had along the front of my house. My house is on a corner, so I actually have two fronts, but I actually have three fronts if you want to count them. Along the main street, I ripped up all the remaining lawn and I planted pollinator gardens. Some success, I wouldn't say it's perfect. So I'm new to flower gardening, but it's completely covered by pollinators. I'm not necessarily the mix of plants that I wanted there. Not everything thrives. And I have little special areas of my property that I try out different experiments with different kind of plants that I want to grow. I'm still very big on introducing different edibles from different places. Anyway, it's, from a psychological standpoint, as an environmental psychologist, I can tell you that I'm happiest when I'm outside, making the flower garden look good by getting the weeds out of it. Is pulling weeds fun? Yeah, it is because you're really helping to shape the landscape. Some of the leaves I pull out, I bring in the house and eat, lots of lamb's quarters and things like that. And in fact, there's a whole literature on foraging. And I had a chance to hang out with a wonderful forager who unfortunately passed away and learned some things. The more I learn, the better it is. It's fascinating how many hundreds and hundreds of plants you have on even two small urban lots. So there's a lot to constantly learn about the plants that are there already or that show up or that you plant yourself. It's like this whole mix of origins of the plants. One of my major weeds are maple trees. I have some maple trees, which are beautiful. One of them's very old, but they seed, and I spend a lot of my time pulling out maple seedlings where I have a dense maple forest, which isn't necessarily what I need. But if you looked out my windows, you would see greenery everywhere. You would see trees everywhere. Outside this window, I have beautiful flowers on trees that are still flowering. A major issue, of course, for all of us is climate change. And the way that's affected me is that my property is in a very low area. So when there's a lot of flooding, my area gets very saturated, which can be bad for some of my plants. Some of them are happy with it, and you kind of sort out the ones that don't like it, don't live. The ones that can handle it do. We've also had major droughts. And again, some of the plants handle that better. I do water somewhat selectively, but I've got so many plants that I'm very conscious of using water. Even though I do actually collect water, I have rain collection system, but it's not practical for covering all of my trees. So sometimes I lose plants They can't handle drought. You really kind of learn what works and what doesn't. But managing a property as small as mine, but with as much going on, is a lot of work. Sometimes more than I can handle, and sometimes I have someone help me, and sometimes I just get behind on everything, which is often. I try and keep my trails open, so I do mow the trails. But it's a really interesting thing. I learned this on one of my old properties. But even though I don't have very much land, I have a massive amount of trails. So you could walk for, a half hour on different trails through a small property because you're going around the trees this way and then you're going around the trees that way. It's just a lot of fun. It's great for walking our dogs. It's essentially an urban park. And that brings me to another point, which is that we've had major air pollution events, Canadian wildfire smoke coming down to us, our own fires in this area, unfortunately. All it's unfortunate. And I'm very affected by air pollution. I have a lot of lung problems. So sometimes I have to stay inside with air conditioning on. I can't help it. But my property is, first of all, much cooler than all the other properties around because of the tree cover. And second of all, my trees help to make my breathing on my property much easier than if I go off my property. The flip side of it is I have to also be very conscious about fire management. So I spend a lot of my time removing the when I prune my plants, I collect lots of brush. If I just leave it sit there, I'm inviting fires on my own property, which could affect me and my neighbors. So I have to really try to figure out how to, on one hand, create habitat, and on the other hand, make myself and my neighbors susceptible to a fire event that would be catastrophic for us. So there's a lot to consider. It's a complex system. You can do it as we're doing with our pollinator project by giving people a small number of plants and asking them to plant a small flower garden. That's not overwhelming. You can do what I'm doing, which is somewhat overwhelming, but in a very positive way. And when you really realize all that goes into kind of managing our relationship to nature, and I'm just talking about on my own property, uh, it requires a lot of knowledge and thinking and learning, constant learning not just from reading things or going to seminars, do those things, but learning from what works and what doesn't work, learning from when you have happy plants and when you don't have happy plants, and modifying your behavior accordingly. I don't have a whole lot of insect problems. And I think that has to do with the fact that I got the property to a point where it's a pretty self-sustaining ecosystem and it balances out the pest issues. Animal issues are a different question. They're a little challenging since I'm not trying to kill things. So anyway, it's a whole different approach to a property. If we were doing this with a video camera, I could show you. If you were here, I could have you taste things. But it's just nothing nicer than being able to walk outside and munch something that's growing right on your property. In terms of the quality of food, we know that our whole food system is broken in so many different ways. And when you can control the input so that you know your food is organic and growing in healthy soil, and when you can, you know that you didn't spray, your fruit may not look beautiful, but it's tastes fine. You couldn't sell it probably because it doesn't look good. Um, but in terms of consumption, it's great. Um, this is a whole way of controlling things that are otherwise out of control. And a lot of the psychology that we're confronted with today is the fact that we don't have control over things like our food system, like the environment, what we're breathing, what we're drinking, what we're eating. And all those are major concerns. And we can establish a lot of control over that in the things that we do, even on a fairly small amount of property. Even people who only have balconies can do an enormous amount and using planters. It's a garden from. And you can begin to really change your environment, and it just changes your whole attitude and your whole thinking about yourself, your ability to control stress and cope with things that otherwise are out of control. And so I think it's worked for me. It's worked for my family. And uh, I have some neighbors who hate what I do because they want my lawn back. They like the sound of those mowers and those leaf blowers. My leaves go into compost, no leaf blowing. But most of the people who come by just love what I'm doing. They like the fact that they can look at nature out of their windows by looking at my property. They often want to do the same thing. So hopefully this has been useful. So I don't know if you have any final questions, but I've used up much of the time just by rattling on.
No, that was perfect. I really appreciate it. Yeah. No, that sounds incredible, honestly. It sounds like you got quite the little tiny habitat going on there, pun intended on that one. And I would love to walk around and eat some of that fruit you were talking about. Mulberry jam sounds delicious. I'm jealous. I want to respect your time, Dr. Edelstein. Thank you so much. I was going to ask, but I think you just answered it. What is the low hanging fruit? Like the average person, what can they do with that first step you think that people can do to really kind of contribute to creating a better environment overall?
You can start small and start with what you have to work with, and you learn over time. I've been doing this for 55 years, so maybe longer. And you don't have to get there in 5 minutes. But lawns are really a model of an industrial society applied to nature. We need to have a nature society applied to nature and to ourselves. And so whatever steps you can take to do that are well worth taking.
Amazing. Well, I appreciate it, Dr. Edelstein. Thank you so much for the time. Would love to talk to you in the future. Look forward to chatting soon.
I'll just end by saying that when you asked what are the low hanging fruit, I was thinking about the mulberries because mulberry trees are very tall. You can't get at the fruit very easily without climbing. And so you're always looking for that low hanging fruit. So always create low hanging fruit.
Thanks for listening to the Planetary Health Lab podcast. If you're interested in being a guest or want to nominate someone doing full work in integrative wellness, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out by email at info@tinihabitat.com. That's info@tinihabitat.com. Better health starts with better information. Keep learning with us on Instagram, Spotify, and X.